So I do need to explain for the people watching
Okay.
why I'm here and not Tareya,
Okay.
our lovely host.
Okay.
I am the executive producer of Columbus Can't Wait, and I am here stepping in for her as she is taking well-deserved time off. But excited to talk to our Columbus City School Board candidates. I have here with me Kimberley Mason, one of the esteemed candidates for this upcoming election in November. Super excited to have you. We were just talking about growing up as a military kid, and that what that upbringing has meant for you.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about like your background, like growing up, some of what like makes you who you are?
Oh, okay, fair.
Yeah.
Well, I was born. No, I'm just kidding. Kimberley Mason. As our host mentioned, I am a military brat, so definitely have had the opportunity to kind of mix and mingle with all different walks of life. I think that that's probably been one of my biggest skill sets because one of two things, not only just being able to meet people where they're at, but more importantly, to being able to kind of blend with others as well too, and recognize that we really don't have 6 degrees of separation at the end of the day. We have more in common than what we believe. My dad's a retired Marine, my mom's a retired nurse. So I like to say I've kind of lived a life of service, and that's being able not only just to help serve and support other people, but I think more importantly, being able to stand in the gap for other people when it comes for advocacy, because oftentimes we don't know what we need until somebody can also be a resource. So definitely not a native of Columbus, Ohio, but have a lot of family here throughout the sides of town. Mason is my married name, so my maiden name is Lloyd, essentially. But I like to say at the end of the day, looking at both sides of the family, where we've grown holistically, that's probably one of the biggest things. Uniquely, I am a widow. So I had the opportunity to kind of run for Columbus City School Board of Education, and during that time when I did, my late husband had passed. And so I had every good reason to drop out the race. And I think going back to probably the makeup of helping to support other people in advocacy, sometimes realizing that what we go through in life, right? It is uniquely our own journey, but it's not too different from somebody else. And sometimes people need to see somebody on the other side to know that they can make it too.
Right. I know you also have a background in mental health. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you got into that field?
Yeah. So I have 17 years of experience that's different from a wide net. I like to say I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. But essentially, my mental health stems for working at Mary Haven, specifically with youth struggling from mental health and adolescence. At that time, I'll say early career, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And at that time, just realizing the justice system, specifically for Black and Brown, I didn't feel like, or maybe I didn't know how to honor my own voice, I should say. So I entered financial services, wound up working for JP Chase, and that was during the financial housing crisis. At that time, let me know that, hey, there's a lot of things going on that I just couldn't help and serve. So I decided to go back and continue my education, which took me down the route of psychology, and that's where led me over to Mary Haven, wanting to specifically work with youth. Oftentimes, I like to feel like we say our youth isn't prepared or adequate or not ready. And for life hits people sometimes early, and they just need the tips, tools, and resources to kind of navigate. So had the opportunity to work in between, there was an all-girls unit and the all-boys, and kind of working back and forth between some of the kiddos. And what I had found is that our curriculum that those students were receiving at that time kept them in a constant loop rather than giving them advancement opportunities. Not wanting to necessarily be burdened by that as well too, and feeling less impactful. But I also had 2 students that kind of went through some life-changing experiences. And so I think at that moment for me, burnout is high in mental health and social services. And this was a time well before COVID, and COVID at best tried to highlight mental health, right? But we're still light years behind to making sure that we can create the space and provide the resources available too. So definitely spent a few years there before my second son was born. And then after that time, just wanted to see where I could kind of help close the gap, I should say, in the next steps.
Got it. A bit of a backtrack, but you mentioned your children, and obviously being a CCS parent, you have a unique experience coming into this race. Can you talk to me about like how your experience as a parent, how you look at the challenges that CCS and the district is facing, how that uniquely affects families, and what your thoughts are on like approaching it from a parent perspective?
I'd like to say when we first moved into CCS, I should say our decision to move to CCS when we bought our home was based on a upcoming tax levy. And so we thought about that's a great way to invest now and see the return on the investment in the future. And so our journey started over. I live on the South Side resident. So one of our South Side schools, PTO president at the end of the day. I think getting in to be able to kind of serve not only just the families, but I think in the same sense, learn a little bit more about the culture, learn a little bit more about the teachers, just holistically in that process. And I like to say some things that I learned that I think were encouraging for me as a PTO parent, but are definitely a struggle for a parent. It's just the communication process. It's not a double-edged sword, or it doesn't have that fluidity like we would like. Essentially, it's often kind of if the parent doesn't communicate or show up, right? There's the gaps of conversation or communication in the process. One thing I had learned kind of trying to navigate through that process was that Stewart specifically was trying to revitalize their PTO. So they hadn't had a PTO in about 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And so prior experience, because we lived in a different school district, I was able to kind of bring some of the tips, tools, and resources that I had learned from their PTO that we could add value that were low-hanging fruit, didn't have a heavy lift, made everybody feel inclusive, and it was just a different level of engagement. And the engagement that I looked at weren't just things that you could just attract money. Monetary is not always the solution. It's a great one, but it's not the end-all, the be-all. So where were ways that if families could not contribute financially, right, we still could create opportunities for them to show up in the classroom and be part of it. Those by far were some of the most exciting times because at that particular point, not only did our PTO grow, we didn't have a parent ambassador. We were able to finally lock that in. We were able to have room moms, just seeing a shift, I should say. And Stewart is considered a lottery school. So essentially, when we think about the difference between a neighborhood school and a lottery school, you have students coming from all different walks of life. One thing I had learned, because that was kind of coming into the culture that our parents don't engage in, I did a visual survey of just serving around the school to see when people were coming by. And then I took a physical survey, and what I had learned is about a third of our population, if not half, were working third shift. And that include Amazon to being a nurse. So essentially having something in the evening, right, is going to self-isolate you at the end of the day. So I worked to kind of create opportunities that were still fun and engaging for in the morning if you got off of work, to making sure that we could hit that population, making sure that I was present. So you've seen I'm PTO president. First day back to school each year, we had a popcorn celebration, and I'm out there handing out welcome packets before you enter the building. And so structurally, you'd stop at this table first, and then you go around, and you'd have to get your ticket at your classroom and then come back out. That was your exit. We've seen the growth, and it wasn't just a growth from a community standpoint, but it was also a growth that we've seen in the academic standpoint as well, too.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is that you're obviously very involved. I know you have a high schooler. Do you also have a middle schooler?
No, he's not in middle school. He's still in elementary.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
So how is their school year going so far? I know like 2025, like you said, has been a tough year, especially I think for this district. post closings, looking forward or looking ahead to more closures in the future, possibly with the budget situation. How are they like taking it? How is that affecting them?
So our household's a little bit different, not only just from like open communication, but to that point earlier this month, there was a youth candidate forum. So in our household, we recognize it's our job to support. So I'm a little bit old school, it takes a village. And I say all that to say, like, them coming to a candidate forum to hear city council and other school board candidates, that was advocacy and civil engagement right there in front of them. So for them, I think their onset's a little bit different. I think when you have working relationships with your schools, it can look and feel a bit different, and that's not necessarily a ding to anybody because life continues to move on. But I say all that to say, for at least my boys and their friends and the friends that we've had and we've made and come and go essentially, their experience, it's just another normal day of, I need you to get up on time and get out the door.
Gotcha. I want to talk about the school closure situation. I know this time last year we were talking about leaked documents and, infighting with the union and the board. This year, that's still a possibility of more school closures. How, if you were to be elected to the board, how would you make sure that the communication and the trust between the board and the community, parents, students, is not the way that it was last time? How would you help improve that communication to where we're not like back into that situation where voices aren't being heard or felt like they aren't being heard?
No, that's a great question. That's definitely been a hot topic between the primary until now. Trust has been broken long before we got to this part. And I'm a firm believer, you do not trust what you don't respect, and you cannot respect what you don't trust. So that being said, when I look at school closures, they're not ideal. We'll just call it for what it is. And not just looking from the fiscal standpoint, but I'm looking from the legacy and the impact, between Berry Middle that's been on the south side, that's close to being demolished. There's a lot of legacy to Monroe Middle as well too. So when we look at school closures, it's not just about the infrastructure at the end of the day. It is also about the lives and generations that have come through those walls and the tales that essentially, how are we making sure we capture that it's within its essence? I know you mentioned like your school that you graduated from and they have a strong alma mater, but not every side of town has that same representation. And so a lot of that gets built throughout the years as well too. I say that to say, in this space and where we're at today currently, school closures are still not ideal. I'm mixed and torn, I should say, in this process. So on one end, when I think about wraparound services, when I think about full staffing, when I think about access to certain curriculum that we know when we look at certain pockets of town are not available because we don't have the bandwidth, closing schools might allow closing those gaps as well in those certain areas because now you have more resources, whether if it's a full-time nurse, social services, whether if it's just a gym teacher that's full-time at one building. What I think from a community standpoint is that we need to be a little bit more transparent in that conversation. What I mean by transparency is that people cannot help or prepare if they don't know what to anticipate. And oftentimes, what we have seen in the past is that we have people making decisions that are not best reflective of all the communities in Columbus City schools. And so what happens is that instead of inviting people to the conversation to kind of figure out the legacy, the past, or maybe some solutions that's in the back door, we just kind of write that off and think that we know the best decision. I think as a board, it's very imperative for us to be reminded that our job is to be a reflection of the community. We're to amplify the voices that we're hearing, not necessarily control them or navigate them.
Right. People just want to be heard at the end of the day.
100%.
So I know the closure conversation has been brought up again because of the funding. We're also seeing funds being diverted from the state and federal government. I know the board just voted to cut 50 million from the budget. So you are potentially walking to a situation that is very dire, very tough, especially in this current climate. How do you plan on walking that walk and providing solutions and strategies that maybe have not been thought about, or people are hesitant to embrace? And how do you plan on like bridging the gap between yourself and your other board members?
That's fair, and I'll work a little bit backwards. I don't necessarily want to maybe bridge the gap between me and future board members, because I think at the end of the day, if we also recognize our strengths and then we're able to kind of placate off of that, that within itself, yes, will show the difference, but we still have to be united as one. When it comes to why would I want to walk into the fire, essentially, right? Being that most of my career has been spent in nonprofit, so we know if you've never worked in nonprofit, that within itself is already a beast. And so you're constantly faced with challenges in financials, challenges in staff, challenges in structure, and change that constantly comes overwhelming as well too. So I like to say, since I've spent most of my career in that space, that's not going to be something to just completely turn me away. And I think when it comes to the board, or what the community I think is calling for moving forward, is to have 7 individuals who are best reflective to meet those needs. So 7 individuals that might be strong in policy, to community, to the advocacy, and so that then we're able to kind of tackle this together. More importantly, from my own experience of walking into this, is that I know that while I may not look like what I've been through, that life looks different for everybody. And it's not about the judging or condemning, but it's about creating the space so that other people have an opportunity to grow and thrive. And CCS has been resilient for years, but has been lacking somebody that's going to be able to stand in the gap and call those things to action. We know that there's a lot of challenges with the budget, even from the last levy to the increase that they thought they were going to receive. I think that's also one of my greatest strengths. When you work in other different industries, you understand the fiscal part of it a little bit different. You have to have a return on your investment, and our investment is student success. And so we're keeping that at the forefront, regardless of our strengths, regardless of the challenges, that it's our job to make sure that we are producing student successful individuals who can be self-sufficient by the time 18 comes, because this world tells you at 18 you have to figure everything out, right? But that's not true, because life is its greatest experience as well too. But if we can give you some tips and tools of how to navigate that, whether you have a career waiting for you or you've been able to complete some college degrees so that you don't have a higher debt to income when it comes to that, that within itself will show the student success. It shows that we're investing. And then I think when it comes to the value proposition of how people view CCS, one thing I've done differently as a future school board member, just in general, is that I like to learn. And sometimes learning is from your neighbors behind you. So specifically where I live, I'm kind of neighboring 3 different school districts. And so how are they setting up their schools for success? And what I had learned, their student success model is that everything is driven to the student success, the schools, and then wrapped around that from the business development standpoint. So we know that Columbus is a top 5 rising city, right? We know that we're growing, but why do we not know that the value proposition is in our backyard? And that's something, when it comes to that connection piece, that I'm hoping to champion in this process, because it's not just from a community perspective of elevating the voices and recognizing what we have in our backyard, but being able to see the developers in the future that's going to come, so that we can marry the two and make sure that we have the workforce ready and the self-sufficiency individuals that we need, specifically in Columbus, Franklin County area.
Gotcha. You mentioned workforce development. I know that's one of your big pushes. Talk to me about any changes to the curriculum you have in mind, or new programs that you want to help champion, foster in the district?
Yeah, no, great question. So previously I spent time with the trade association that my job was to kind of kick off a statewide internship program. And I not only just had the state of Ohio, but I covered our neighboring states as well too. But the goal was to expand students into the banking industry specifically. When you look at a banking industry, most people just think it's a teller services, but there's so much to offer. So not only did I have to recruit, attract and retain individuals, but this was only from a student's perspective and from our business partners that I worked with. And I created the curriculum year over year for the cohort. The curriculum that I created was actually specifically driven on the students' skill sets for that class. And so for me, I'm a firm believer that the employer will teach you how to do the job. But once you recognize the power and what you have within you, you can navigate everything else. It also lets you know if you're in an environment that you shouldn't be there too long, if it's toxic, or if it's an environment that you can see yourself grow too. So seeing the students that I helped in the collegiate space, kind of what brought me back here full circle, I want to say, just seeing the gaps, the challenges, the navigation process of them even having those soft skill developments. But they were very much successful once they had the tips and tools. All the students who came to my program, they had a 2-week training and development where we just went through, how to become your best self. And by the end of that 12-week internship program, they walked away with knowledge beyond. And so what would that look like when you bring it down to high school level, if you introduce that at middle school, especially when we know that middle school is the biggest gap area where we see students dealing with bullying or chronic absenteeism, things of that nature. If we get you excited about what careers could look like, and then we have strategic pathways that make sure that you can start to explore them sooner rather than later, I think that within itself can change what the classroom looks like. I'm very much of an out-of-the-box thinker because I want to make sure that the information from a curriculum standpoint, I'm delivering is best suited. One thing about Columbus and just Ohio in general is that we're a local controlled. So that means that we have the opportunity the state has a curriculum, right? But as far as what needs to be taught or how it needs to be taught, we actually have control of that. And I think if we do a deep dive into our community, we can find some courses that will not only just help from a national standing and better preparedness, but I think in the same sense also help to capture everyone's voice, because then there'll be something in the curriculum that people can see within themselves.
I know you mentioned chronic absenteeism as that big thing, especially for middle schoolers. I know the report card also just came out mentioning that that was a big place where we could be improving. 50% of students missing at least 10% of the school year. And I know that there are some initiatives that the district has implemented. I know the Stay in the Game initiative, where they're bringing the athletes to schools to help get kids fired up. Do you have any other strategies in mind to get kids back in school? I just feel like this is a big issue because we're also now talking about the school busing for high schoolers, where we're possibly eliminating busing for high schoolers, and that's definitely not going to improve absenteeism. So, what do you what do you think? Like, what do you suggest, or do you have any ideas or anything that you've seen other districts do as well?
That's a great question. And I'll work backwards in this space. We know that eliminating busing without a strategic pathway, right, itself is not going to add value or reduce the chronic absenteeism. More importantly, just looking after the numbers from COVID, essentially. COVID itself, while we can say that's an anomaly and what happened, the years afterwards, it just increased from 40% to 50% to 60%, essentially. So we've already been in that space, right? And so now, does this really add value if we take away a resource for individuals that could be needing that and that are making the effort and have the opportunities to come to school. I think we have to look at what does the classroom look like today. So I like to say when I was in middle school going to high school, I was that generation that was told, if you don't go to college, you're not going to be self-sufficient. And that's when they were taking trades and certifications away from the classroom. At that particular time, everybody had to learn how to type from the computer, and it was great, right? But what happened on the forefront is that you had all these people go to college, have all this debt, and then once you got onto the workforce, your income check was not even enough to be self-sufficient. So coupled with that, from a workforce development standpoint, right, we look at skill set and the experience. So you can now go to school for 4 years, but if you have no experience, you're still starting at ground zero. I say all that to say, if we know we have that data, we know we've seen this trend, why do we not look like, what does classrooms have to look like outside of? It's not just necessarily just the community schools model, but once again, understanding our learners and how they best thrive. If we know that some people just thrive best by going to work, essentially, and doing something tangible, why is that not something in our curriculum or a pathway that can be built into the curriculum? I'm a firm believer as a parent, right? Sometimes part of being a parent is that you have to have your children do things they don't want to do, right? But it's once they see the outcome afterwards that they're like, okay, this makes sense. And I think it's also just connecting better with the community to show the correlation, right? It's a difference to get 100 robocalls to just say, oh, you need to come to this event, and you don't know if it's a call of absenteeism or things of that nature. Mm-hmm. I'm also from the generation that, calling or coming to the house was a little bit different for teachers too. Now I understand today's culture and climate's a little bit different, so that's fair, but with the advancement of technology and the amount of resources that we have available, why can we not be more creative when it comes to the classroom and making sure that students are excited to come to work? I'm also a firm believer that, and I'll call this for what this is, that when we look at our families, and if I look at my own family and some of my cousins, life has been different. And for some of those kids, if you can get exposed to a different career opportunity or entrepreneurship, maybe a little bit sooner in life, you can make some different choices too. Mm-hmm. If we're not presenting that and a child is in a demographic area that's all they see, it is hard to see outside of that exposure as well too. And so I think if we took that coupled with the data of what we've seen in the millennial generation specifically of transitioning to the workforce, and then understanding for a lot of our Gen Z specifically, COVID and how that impacted the social skills setting, right? We can maybe create some curriculum that looks a little bit different. If we have students that have more of an entrepreneurial drive, what does that look like to have more of an arts and inclusive and business workshops that's in the classroom? Why not? Or why not do we partner with some of our businesses in our backyard so that students get an opportunity to go to expose that sooner? We don't need to fit everybody into a box because learning's not meant to be that way, and because we've been a little bit pigeonholed with the report card, I should say, to meet certain metrics. I think that we can meet them, but we just have to be creative about that. We have to communicate to the families that, hey, this is going to change or this is an opportunity. And then from there, we have to also stick to the plan. One thing that I've learned with CCS, about every 3 to 5 years, they're changing something new. And so one thing from if you're creating your own business, right, that entrepreneurial lens, it takes 3 to 5 years for you to be self-sufficient as an adequate business. So if we're changing every 3 to 5 years what we're doing from our pathways to our SMART goals and things, we haven't even seen if we put in enough effort to see if it's working. And if we do see it early enough, right, then why are we still dragging along it the next 3 to 5 years as well too?
Why do you think that is, that we keep getting these different, pathways or strategies?
Sometimes that's also driven by the superintendent, so and anywhere in life, I'm a firm believer that having individuals who can stay in a certain line of business can be great. I'm also mindful that legacy can sometimes go along with that too. And so when you also have maybe a legacy that you're going against that says, hey, we've always done it this way, then that itself, breaking that barrier, is half the battle. And sometimes the challenges that I think our superintendents and maybe our board has received as that disconnect between the internal process is that we want to keep things a certain kind of way. We want to get outside the box. But who's marrying and having that conversation to say, hey, there's parts of this legacy that we're moving over here. It just looks and feels different, doesn't take away the value. And then there's things that we've always done the same that just don't make sense. And at the end of the day, if we look at the data, how is that adding value?
I know another big thing that you've brought up is the corporate handouts when it comes to investing in CCS and eliminating those to invest in that community, investing into our schools. And I know that might be a tough battle, so to say. How do you plan on having that conversation, getting that conversation started, and maybe even bringing in partnerships that make that lift easier on the district?
That's fair. So one thing I've done differently this time running as a candidate is moving more in action and then letting the words kind of be the sound bite, I should say, in the back for us. So one thing is that understanding all that is interconnected to Columbus City. So that's not just City Council. That's our Franklin County Commissioners. That's our engineer office. That is our state representatives and our senators as well too. And building those relationships with people to understand from both sides of the aisle, what are your challenges? Because are they self-ego or are they really data-driven? And then from there, how can we be more inclusive to understanding that if it comes to workforce development? Because I'm big in this space that if Columbus is growing the way it's growing at this particular rate, and another 10 to 15 years, if we don't have a workforce, what was that for? How did that add value? So now we have all of this business, but we have nobody to work it and maintain it and sustain it. And we know that by sustaining, that also drives back into the properties, the houses, and the neighborhoods. So right now, specifically, like when we look at our seniors, and I'm full circle, so give me a second. But when we look at our seniors, essentially they've done their due diligence, right? You bought your home, you've paid your taxes, and you have no problem making space for the next generation. But at the end of the day, if there's not a generation who's working, how is that reciprocal to what has been already paid and paved on the way? I say all that to say, I've been having conversations because once again, in every place and space that I've been, whether if it is from community development and just that nonprofit, you have to rely on your community specifically because there's resources from a funding that you just don't have or you're maxed out. And so you need those people to see the value proposition of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to bring. Conversations that I've been having to kind of understand what are we currently doing to attract and retain? How can we expand? Who has the resources and not just maybe the monetary, but maybe even the building space, right? From a training and development outlook that we can tap into. So we're also not reinventing the wheel. More importantly, I think when it comes to the corporate handouts, that when we look at the last 15 to 20 years, we have seen millions of dollars go out the door or down the garbage disposal. And at the end of the day, that is the same amount of money that when we look at school closures, when we look at supportive services, when we look at busing, that these may not be topics of conversation if we were a little bit more mindful to whom it was actually going to impact at the end of the day. I think let me say this, I think we could have had more of a tier system if you wanted to get to that type of 100% abatement. If you think about where we're at as a society, if you go to Kroger's and you sign up for a reward card, well, you don't get to redeem so much until you've actually put in so much, right? And so what would that same concept and model look like? Because whether if we wanted to have employers that if at tier one, it was just, I and I won't say the numbers, but essentially you offered X amount of internships. Tier 2, then you had that not only so much internships, but then maybe a nonprofit that works with the school, your company also volunteers and gives back and helps. So if we're closing the gap from a latchkey perspective, because not every school has latchkey after school. Tier 3 could be all of that included that. Then maybe there's new technological resources at the school as well too. So if we're going to give away that type of money, right? Where were we thinking about from our future, our current standpoint and our future, to making sure that we were reinvesting that? And I think that's the conversation we want to have, and I want to champion, because I also believe that a lot of these developments, they are on a renewal. They'll come back up again and they'll want to still doing business. Well, as I've learned from a lot of people, and I can say this as a military brat to a certain degree, you know, when you kind of move to Columbus, it puts a little hold on you. So it's not just so easy to leave. So I say all that to say, if we can get our businesses to understand that as well too, I think from a holistic standpoint, we could see ourselves in a better position, not just financially, right, but from a community standpoint and resourceful standpoint. Because at the end of the day, the resources are there, but we're not having those conversations and bringing that to the forefront. They're normally after the fact, right? After decisions made. And I say that to say, one thing I've learned this time around is that there's a lot of neighborhood associations birthed out of the city's office. And they're a group of volunteers that pretty much advocate for each of the neighborhoods. There's about 25 of them. And so when a developer comes, they actually go to those neighborhoods to ask for the permission for whatever they plan to do. Mm-hmm. And the neighborhoods are advocating right then and there to say what's the best interest. But when it comes to that communication, that information coming to the board, that's last. So this time around, if I know, right, I have a working relationship with my neighborhood association and somebody wants to come develop, then I can be present at that meeting to ask, so you may have come from California, right? But how are you a good neighbor? How do you want to value this area? Do you want just this land because we've kind of just forced people out of their area? Or do you want this land because you see the value proposition and the future ready workforce that can come along with it? And then being able to have those conversations and amplify the voice, because oftentimes our community doesn't know about those things. You don't know about it until something's breaking ground. And so the process is a developer comes to neighborhood associations, they weigh in, it goes to city council weighs in, then it comes to school board. To me, we need to change that wheel of communication.
Right. You mentioned having those conversations, and I'm wondering like what the reception has been so far, because to me it would sound like a developer would be open to these conversations if they were happening early enough. Mm-hmm. Just because like when you invest in your community, that provides value to, you know, whatever you're doing in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So what has that reception been like? I mean,
the conversations that I've been having has been very welcoming, you know. I think sometimes it's more of an aha, like, I didn't know, I didn't think about that. And so if we're not having those conversations first because that's where I lead my conversations in every place and space I've been. It's about the workforce, essentially. So how can I partner with you so that, you know, these individuals can be exposed to this opportunity, so that then that's an opportunity to invest and maybe they can become your future employees. That's my mindset at the end of the day.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's all of my questions, but do you have anything that I might have missed, something that you want to add, any like last plugs, anything like that?
You know, I like to say, oftentimes I try to tell people, election time isn't the only time that you should tune in. You know, voter engagement just starts with the little things. And I hope that while maybe the heightened state of CCS and where we're at will encourage people to just stay better locked in to understanding the values and visions of the people who are wanting to serve in these spaces. And I'm not just saying from the local level, right? This is just big picture, but making sure that you do your due diligence to understand that, research that, so that I think from a relationship standpoint, right, it helps build the community, because now you've taken the time to learn about how you can partner and show up best as well too. And so I'm thankful for today's conversation. I hope whoever watches this, that it adds value and what my leadership skills will look like, and that if you value me as well too, that you'll consider me for voting. Early vote starts October 7th, general elections November 4th.
Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Thank you.